I was halfway through my morning coffee when two security guards appeared at my desk. "The board wants to see you. Now." My heart pounded as I stepped into the conference room. Richard Cole, our CFO, slid a termination letter across the table. No warning. No explanation. But as his smug smile lingered, I reached into my coat pocket and felt the thick envelope I'd carried for weeks. Inside wasn't just my resignation. It was the truth that could tear this company apart. I turned, walked past stunned faces, and headed straight for Richard's office. He had no idea what was coming. I used to believe loyalty was rewarded. 15 years in this company, working my way from junior analyst to senior financial strategist, had convinced me of that. My name is Jack Morgan, and for most of my career, I was the man they called when the numbers didn't make sense. The one who could untangle messes no one else dared to touch. For a long time, I thought that made me indispensable. I thought wrong. It was 2:07 a.m. when I slid my key into the front door. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I stepped into the living room, my tie loose, my briefcase heavy. In the dim light spilling from the kitchen, I saw my daughter's school bag on the couch. Her tiny sneakers sat neatly beside it. I pushed her bedroom door open, just enough to peek inside. She was asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, hair spilling across the pillow. "Jack?" My wife's voice was soft, but carried a weight I couldn't ignore. She stood in the hallway in her robe. "You missed dinner. Again." "I'm sorry," I whispered, loosening my tie. "She asked about you," she said. "She said, I miss Daddy." The words landed heavier than any spreadsheet or deadline ever could. I promised I'd make it up to both of them. I always promised. That night, after they went back to sleep, I sat at my desk at home and checked my email. A notification from the AI fraud detection system I'd built months ago blinked at the top of my inbox. Unusual financial patterns detected. Offshore transfers linked to environmental grants. My stomach tightened. This wasn't supposed to trigger unless there was something serious, something buried deep. I bookmarked it for the morning, telling myself it could wait. The next day, the first crack appeared. I walked into the morning project meeting, expecting to lead the discussion on the new sustainability fund we'd been developing for months. Instead, the chair at the head of the table was already occupied by Brian, my colleague, and someone I'd considered a friend. "Brian will be heading this initiative from now on," our department head announced, without making eye contact with me. "Jack, your focus will be on other priorities." I sat there, frozen. I had spent weeks assembling the proposal, negotiating with partners, running the risk assessments. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. After the meeting, I overheard two junior analysts whispering near the coffee machine. "Did you hear about Jack? They say he screwed up the projections, cost us a fortune." It was a lie, and a clumsy one at that, but it was spreading. That afternoon, I found the source. Brian leaned against my office doorway, casual, smiling like nothing had changed. "Tough break today," he said. "Why did you tell them I messed up the projections?" I asked. He shrugged. "Things move fast here. You know how it is." Then he walked away. The betrayal stung worse than the demotion. Brian and I had worked side by side for years. We'd covered for each other during crises, shared late-night takeout over stacks of reports. And now, he had driven the knife in without hesitation. Have you ever been stabbed in the back by the one person you trusted to watch your six? I have. And it doesn't just hurt, it changes you. I tried to focus on my work, but the whispers followed me down the hallways. Emails stopped arriving in my inbox. Meetings I'd normally be part of took place without me. Late that evening, as I was about to log off, a new message popped up from an untraceable address. No subject line. Just one sentence. Don't trust anyone, not even yourself. I stared at it for a long time, the glow of the screen casting shadows across my desk. Outside, the city buzzed with life, unaware that mine had just shifted onto a dangerous path. The offshore transfer data, Brian's betrayal, and now this warning. It all connected somehow. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. The office was nearly empty. Just the hum of the ventilation and the occasional clack of a distant keyboard. I thought of my daughter's voice saying she missed me, of my wife's tired eyes, and of the envelope hidden in my coat pocket at home, the one I'd started filling weeks ago without even knowing why. Something was happening inside this company. Something big enough to push a man like Brian to turn on me. The AI system had given me the first breadcrumb, and now this anonymous warning had given me the second. I didn't know where the trail would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't going to be anywhere safe. I shut down my computer, grabbed my coat, and stepped into the elevator. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked back at me, older, more tired, but sharper. I wasn't ready to make a move yet. Not until I knew exactly who I was up against. The elevator doors slid open, and as I stepped out into the cool night air, my phone buzzed. Another message. Same anonymous address. They've already chosen their scapegoat, and it's you. I didn't know if it was a threat, a warning, or both. But I knew one thing. The game had started, and I was already a pawn on the board. 3 days after the anonymous warning, I found myself in the deserted corridor outside the executive conference suite. Most employees had gone home, the hum of the building reduced to the occasional click of a distant copier. I'd stayed late under the guise of finishing quarterly projections, but in reality, I was here for something else entirely. Through the thin wall of the adjacent break room, I heard voices. Low, deliberate, calculated. I moved closer, my pulse matching the tempo of their words. The transfers are scheduled for Friday. Richard Cole's voice, unmistakable, spoke with that cool detachment he always carried. The media is still distracted. We'll move the funds under the environmental grant cover. A second voice, deeper, with the smooth authority of someone used to commanding entire rooms, replied, "Make sure our names stay out of it. The last thing the board needs is exposure." Richard hesitated. "And Jack Morgan?" The deep voice almost laughed. "A distraction. We need a clean scapegoat. The paperwork is already in motion." It wasn't just Richard. Whoever was on the other end wasn't an investor at all. They had the kind of control that only came from the inside. A board member. I leaned back against the wall, my throat dry. I had been picturing Richard as the puppet master, but now it was clear. He was just another puppet, and the strings were being pulled from higher up. On the walk back to my office, I dialed my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm but frail. "Jack, everything all right?" "Yeah, Mom," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Just checking in." "You sound tired," she said. "Are they working you too hard again?" I wanted to tell her everything. The offshore transfers, the betrayal, the shadowy voice on the other side of the wall. But what would it change? Instead, I asked if she'd taken her medication and told her I'd visit soon. My voice wavered, and I hated that she might hear it. When I hung up, the silence of the office felt heavier than before. I sat down at my desk. Opening a shared drive, I knew the executives didn't think I had access to anymore. Buried in the contract archives, I found it. A multi-million-dollar agreement supposedly signed 2 weeks ago, yet the metadata showed it had been created and signed 6 months earlier. A backdated contract. My AI system hadn't missed it. This was one of the anomalies it had flagged. It was no longer just isolated corruption. This was a network, and they were good at covering their tracks. I began collecting everything. Emails between Richard and the board member, voice memos from my phone, flagged data from the AI system. I encrypted the files and uploaded them to a private blockchain wallet I'd set up after the first anonymous warning. It was an insurance policy. If anything happened to me, the information would still surface. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized I wasn't alone. A series of encrypted messages began appearing in my inbox from someone calling themselves Orion. They claimed to be a former employee who had also been burned by the company and was gathering their own set of evidence. One night, Orion sent me a spreadsheet with a single note. We have the same enemy. The document was a gold mine, cross-referencing data from divisions I'd never worked with, tying multiple shell companies back to the same board member I'd overheard. Whoever Orion was, they'd been at this longer than me. If you had evidence that could dismantle an entire corporation, would you use it, knowing it could destroy careers and maybe lives of people caught in the crossfire? I wrestled with the question every time I opened another file. It was nearly midnight when my office phone rang. Not my cell, the landline, the one almost no one used anymore. I answered cautiously. Jack Morgan? It was Richard's voice, cold and clipped. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties. Do not return to the building until further notice. HR will be in touch. He didn't give me a reason, and I didn't ask for one. The timing told me everything. They'd found something, or suspected I was looking. As I hung up the phone, the last message from Orion blinked onto my screen. They know. The email from HR arrived at 7:12 a.m. A single line requesting my presence in the 12th floor conference room at 9:00 sharp. No agenda. No explanation. Just an unspoken threat in plain text. By then, I'd already decided to play along. The conference room was windowless, the air thick with recycled ventilation. Richard Cole sat at one end of the long mahogany table, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression unreadable. Beside him, a company lawyer, a woman I'd seen before in high-stakes negotiations, flipped open a binder thick with printed documents. 2 security guards flanked the door. Jack, Richard began, his tone almost rehearsed. We have reason to believe you've been involved in unauthorized financial activities that have cost this company significant losses. I didn't respond. The lawyer slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a video. Grainy, but clear enough to show my face, my hands, my signature on a transfer authorization for $500,000 to an offshore account. It was me, and it wasn't me. The angle, the mannerisms, they had it all right. But I'd never sat in that room, never touched that paper, never approved that transaction. My mind snapped to the deepfake footage I'd read about, the kind so good it could fool even the subject. You'll notice the timestamps match the day you claim to be working from home, the lawyer said, her voice as neutral as the room. I could feel the walls closing in. This was their silver bullet, the manufactured proof they needed to erase me from the company and poison any defense I might mount later. I glanced at Richard. His eyes didn't meet mine. He knew, and he knew that I knew he knew. Then, unbidden, my mind drifted to last year, my daughter's 8th birthday. She'd asked me to be there when she blew out the candles. I'd promised, but an urgent meeting had pulled me away, and by the time I got home, she was asleep, her unopened present still on the table. I'd told myself there would be other birthdays, and now, here I was, in another urgent meeting, this one engineered to end more than just my job. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the eyes of every person in the room on me. Is this the part where I'm supposed to beg for mercy? I asked quietly. Richard's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Without another word, I reached into my coat pocket and placed the thick envelope on the table, sliding it toward him. My resignation, I said, my voice steady, effective immediately. His brows furrowed, but he didn't touch it. There's something else in there, I added. You'll want to read it before you decide your next move. No one spoke. I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out, the guards stepping aside. By the time I reached the parking garage, my heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of knowing what came next. I sat in my car, pulled out my phone, and opened the app tied to the AI system I'd been building quietly for months. The interface was simple, one button, one command. I pressed it. The system whirred to life on secure servers far outside the company's reach, compiling every piece of data I'd fed it. Financial anomalies, email trails, metadata from contracts, even the conversation I'd recorded between Richard and the board member. Within minutes, the package was encrypted, duplicated across multiple nodes, and sent to a list of investigative journalists, regulatory agencies, and international watchdog groups I'd prepared weeks ago. It was done. The beauty of the AI wasn't just in collecting evidence. It was in connecting dots human investigators might miss. And as I watched the confirmation logs roll in, I realized it was doing exactly that. First, it mapped the fraudulent transfers I'd already discovered. Then, it branched out, linking them to sister companies in 3 different countries, all tied to environmental grants. Finally, it cross-referenced those with political donations, shell companies, and high-value real estate purchases. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just about Richard or one corrupt board member. This was a network that reached across borders, laundering money through causes designed to look untouchable. And now, the entire architecture was being delivered to people who could dismantle it. If you knew you'd just painted a target on your back for some of the most powerful people in the business world, would you run? Or would you stay and watch the fallout? I didn't have the luxury of deciding right then. My phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number lighting up the screen. I hesitated, then answered. "We know who you are, Jack," a voice said, calm, unhurried, and absolutely certain. "And we're coming." The line went dead. For a moment, the only sound in the car was my own breathing. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen, casting sharp shadows across the parking garage. I started the engine, merging into traffic like any other commuter, but every face in every passing car felt like it might be watching me. Somewhere behind me, in that conference room, Richard was opening the envelope. He'd find my resignation letter on top, polite and professional. Beneath it, a printed summary of the first batch of AI findings, just enough to let him know the information was already gone, far beyond his reach. I didn't know if he'd panic, if he'd call the board member, or if he'd try to salvage what he could. But I knew one thing. The moment that envelope hit the table, the game changed. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the only one trapped in a corner. The first headlines appeared within 24 hours. At first, they were buried in the business sections. Dry language about alleged irregularities and pending regulatory inquiries. But by the end of the week, the story had gone global. Networks replayed charts of plummeting stock prices. Analysts speculated on television about systemic fraud and corporate rot. And social media was ablaze with clips of Richard Cole avoiding reporters outside the company's headquarters. Every hour brought a new wave of coverage. The company's market value dropped by billions. Investors demanded answers, and clients began canceling contracts. I could almost feel the panic rippling through the upper floors of that building I used to call my professional home. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Another whistleblower stepped forward. Not Orion, not me, but someone entirely new. This person had worked in the Environmental Grants Division and provided concrete proof that the so-called green projects were nothing more than shells used to funnel money offshore. Their documents confirmed my AI's findings and added a trail of incriminating internal memos that mentioned names I hadn't dared to connect before. With each revelation, the company's grip on its narrative slipped further. And yet, for the first time in months, I allowed myself a pause. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with my wife and daughter. Real dinner, not takeout containers between phone calls, but a home-cooked meal. My daughter chattered about school, her face bright in a way I hadn't seen in too long. She didn't ask about work, and I didn't bring it up. For an hour, I was just a husband and a father, not a man being hunted by his former employers. After she went to bed, I lingered at the table, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. My wife reached over, squeezed my hand, and smiled. "It's good to have you here," she said. I didn't realize how much I'd missed that feeling. Quiet, steady, unremarkable normalcy. But normal never lasts long in a storm. The next morning, news broke that the federal government had opened a formal criminal investigation into the company's finances. The Attorney General's office confirmed they were pursuing charges related to fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. That was the moment I knew the stakes had escalated beyond corporate damage control. Someone was going to prison. It also meant someone was going to make sure I never testified. By midday, I caught wind of their first move. The company had hired a notorious private cyber intelligence firm, people who specialized in tracking down problems like me. They weren't bound by the same rules as law enforcement. If they found me, they wouldn't bother with subpoenas. Hours later, a video began circulating online. It showed me, clear as day, accepting a briefcase full of cash from an unidentified man in a parking garage. The quality was impeccable. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed it myself. But it was a deep fake, layered over footage from a night I'd actually spent at home. The reaction online was immediate and vicious. Some commenters called me a hero. Others labeled me a fraud who had engineered the entire scandal to cover my own crimes. The truth no longer mattered. It was all about who shouted the loudest. If the whole world believed you were guilty, would you keep fighting? Or would you disappear and let the truth rot in the shadows? I knew my answer. but it didn't make the path ahead any safer. That night, as I sat at my desk trying to anticipate their next move, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't seen in years. It was from Daniel, an old friend still inside the company, one of the few I'd thought might still be on my side. "They're setting you up," the text read. "You need to move. Now." The call came just after midnight. A voice I knew too well, low and deliberate, said, "We need to talk. No cameras, no lawyers, just us." I almost hung up. Every instinct told me Richard Cole was the last person I should be meeting. But the fact that he was reaching out directly, risking surveillance from his own people, meant something had shifted. I agreed to a location, a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the regulars never asked questions. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a black coffee in front of him. The man looked smaller somehow, shoulders slumped, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. "Jack," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Before you tell me to go to hell, hear me out." I sat, arms crossed. "You think I'm the one who came after you," he continued. "And you're right, in part. I signed off on moves to push you out. But I didn't have a choice." I almost laughed. "There's always a choice." His jaw tightened. "Not when the people above you have the power to ruin your life in ways you can't even imagine. You think I run this company? The real control sits with the parent corporation. They own half the board, and they own me." I leaned forward. "Names?" He hesitated, then dropped the real bomb. "The parent company is where you're headed next. That shiny job offer? They're bringing you in to keep an eye on you, or to finish what they started if you don't play along." For a moment, the room felt colder. I'd thought I was escaping one fire, only to walk into the heart of a bigger one. We sat in silence until the waitress refilled our cups. Richard's hands shook slightly as he took a sip. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he admitted. "Sometimes you bend the rules to keep the machine running. Other times, you break them because you're told to. Either way, the guilt doesn't go away." It was the first honest thing I'd heard from him in years. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because the investigation is closing in, and they'll burn me to protect themselves. But I can make sure they don't get you too." From his jacket pocket, he slid a small USB drive across the table. "Everything I've got, names, dates, offshore accounts, orders that came from the top. Use it however you want. Just know, once you open this, you're all in." I pocketed it without a word. 2 days later, I was on a secure video call with Orion and 3 other whistleblowers from around the world, people who had their own stories of being silenced, blacklisted, or threatened by the same network. We started building something bigger than any single case, a coalition. Our plan wasn't just to expose one company. It was to map the entire lattice of shell corporations, political connections, and shadow deals that kept the machine running. The more we dug, the more help appeared from unexpected corners. A contact in the European Financial Crimes Unit, an auditor in Singapore, even a mid-level government official who couldn't go public but quietly fed us key documents. If you had the chance to take down an entire system, knowing the fallout could be chaotic, maybe even dangerous, would you still pull the trigger? Every night, I studied the files on the USB. There were pieces in there that could end careers instantly, but there were also contracts tied to legitimate projects that would collapse if we went fully public. Good people would lose jobs. Families would suffer. The coalition debated for hours. all in or targeted release. Some argued that anything less than full exposure meant letting the rot regrow. Others said precision strikes would cause more damage to the guilty while sparing the innocent. One evening, staring at the glow of my laptop, I realized the decision might have to be mine alone. And then the message came in. Clock's ticking. Choose your shot. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. 6 months after the first headlines broke, the company I had devoted 15 years to no longer existed. The board had been dissolved, assets seized, and several top executives, Richard among them, were led out of federal court in handcuffs. The news channels played the footage on a loop, a cautionary tale for anyone who thought power made them untouchable. I didn't celebrate. Justice in cases like this never feels clean. Too many innocent employees lost their livelihoods. Too many clients were left scrambling. But I knew that in the long run, tearing down a corrupt structure was the only way to rebuild something better. For me, rebuilding meant finding a place where my skills weren't twisted into weapons for the wrong people. That place found me. The offer came from a consultancy specializing in fraud prevention for startups committed to transparency. The pay was modest compared to my old salary, but the work mattered. It wasn't until my first day that I realized the twist. The consultancy had been founded by several members of the Whistleblower Coalition. Orion was one of them, smiling across the conference table like we were old friends finally meeting face to face. They'd taken the winnings from their own battles and built a shield for others. This time, Orion told me, we set the rules. The work was different, smaller scale, but with immediate impact. We trained founders on internal controls, taught teams how to spot red flags before they grew into scandals. And for the first time in years, I went to sleep knowing my efforts weren't feeding something rotten. One crisp autumn morning, I walked my daughter to school. She skipped ahead, then came back to grab my hand, her little fingers warm in mine. We didn't talk about work or headlines. We talked about the art project she was excited to show her teacher. At the school gate, she hugged me and whispered, "See you tonight, Daddy." I stayed there for a moment, watching her disappear into the building, the noise of children filling the air. It was a pause in my life's chaos, a moment I held on to tightly. That afternoon, an encrypted message hit my inbox. It was from an investigative unit overseas, hinting at a multinational conglomerate under active probe. They wanted my help. The timing was deliberate. 2 weeks later, I found myself in a far more personal moment, my daughter's 9th birthday. The house smelled of cake and frosting, laughter echoing through the kitchen. I lit the candles and stood beside her as she made her wish, her eyes glowing in the candlelight. This time, I didn't miss it. The phone stayed off, the laptop shut. I was there for every laugh, every slice of cake, every off-key verse of Happy Birthday. For a few precious hours, the world outside our walls didn't exist. That night, after the guests had gone and she was asleep, I stepped out onto the porch. The stars were sharp against the dark sky, the air cool in my lungs. My phone buzzed on the railing. The sender's name made me pause. It was Brian, my former colleague, the one who'd fed false reports about me in those early days. His message was short. I was wrong. I want in. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, to leave him in the past where he belonged. But the coalition needed people inside the machine, people who knew its tricks. And maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. In the end, I replied with a single line, "We'll talk." As I went back inside, I thought about the path that had led me here. I had left my old life in pieces, but I hadn't walked away empty-handed. I carried the lessons, the scars, and the proof that even in the dirtiest games, there was room for clean wins. Don't ever leave empty-handed. Take your value, your truth, your justice with you. It was almost midnight when another message came in. This one wasn't from Brian, or from any name I recognized. Just a short sentence on a secure channel. "We need you for another job." The details weren't there yet, but the tone told me everything. The fight wasn't over, and I was already considering my answer.